Hello class and welcome to Human Resource Management. In today's lecture we're going to talk about employee accountability and what that means for the workforce. Here you can see the formal scholarly definition of employee accountability. I'm going to read this and then unpack it. There's a lot of information in this definition. The real or perceived likelihood that actions, decisions, or behaviors of an individual, group, or organization will be evaluated by some salient audience, and that there exists the potential for individual, group, or organization to receive either rewards or sanctions based on this expected evaluation. So, for starters, it's important to realize that accountability refers to the perceived or the expected belief that your actions are going to be judged. And your actions can come from those of an individual, those of a group, or those of a department, or those of an entire organization. It really doesn't matter what level you were talking about, individual, group, or organization, but it really is that belief that you're going to be evaluated, that you're going to have to answer for some action, behavior, decisions that you've made. Now, just knowing that we are going to have to answer for our behaviors can affect how people tend to behave. And we can understand this from a basic psychological perspective. Another important part of this is to realize that the audience that's going to evaluate us, that they're salient, that they're meaningful, that they're somehow important to us. If I knew I was going to have to answer to a person that I had no respect for, that had no power, no ability to reward or punish my behaviors, my actions would be very different than if I had to answer to or knew I was going to be judged by someone who actually had reward and sanction power over me. So when we look at employee accountability, a couple important things. One is that there's an expectation that I'm going to have to answer for my behavior, decision, or action that's done. That I'm going to have to answer to someone who's important. And however that definition of important is, it could be a mentor, someone with informal authority, or it could be someone with formal or legitimate authority, such as a manager or a vice president, or the government even. In that audience who I have to answer to, I have to provide some type of justification or is going to evaluate my behavior, that they could either reward or punish me based on their behavior. Now, we don't know what that reward or punishment may be in some cases. In some cases, you do. We don't know what the decision is going to be. In some cases, you may have, ideas of what it may be, but it's that belief that there is this decision that's going to be hung out there, that's going to be made and placed upon my behaviors and actions, that really fuels what accountability is all about. Now, when we think about this in this broad context, we see that accountability truly is a psychological glue, so to speak, that holds all organizations together. There's a number of research studies, as you can see here, which kind of talk to or attest to that fact. And when we start looking at the scholarly research throughout the business literature, we'll see that many of them have underpinnings or are related to employee accountability in one way or another. For example, Cummings and Anton said in their 1990 article, accountability is a vital part of organizational life because it helps to ensure predictability and conformity to workplace expectations. And I can't stress how important this is, but employee predictability is very important. Managers need to be able to say, my employees are going to do X, Y, and Z. If I gave them instructions, they're going to follow them, and the outcome will be predictable. Can you imagine if there was an organization where management or coworkers could not behave in a way that they could predict the behaviors or the outcomes of behaviors of their coworkers? You would have complete chaos and anarchy. There's no way an organization could function without this accountability system in place, that glue that binds it all together. Tetlock states in his articles about accountability that accountability is a functional part of jobs because it serves as a mechanism that links employees to organizations. So you don't have employees just running around doing whatever they want to do. No, they know that their actions and behaviors are going to be evaluated, and they're going to be rewarded or punished based on that evaluation. So they tend to align their behaviors in congruence with what the organization wants. In another article, Tetlock goes on to say that accountability is not only, for organizations, but it is the fundamental for every social system that exists. Whether it is, people driving down the road and they see a police officer, Why do we push on our brakes? Because we know that we may be held accountable for our behavior if we're speeding. And then Frank and Klimonsky state that accountability is an important part of all social systems because it serves as a mechanism for shaping human behavior. The role of accountability within organizations is especially important because organizations seek to fulfill specific objectives. And the most broad objective for all organizations is to deliver financial profit to their owners or to their stakeholders. So given that organizations have this very specific goal they must accomplish, then it's important that the individuals in that organization behave in a predictable way that's in line with the organizational goals. In the definition of accountability, we look at different levels of accountability. What I mean by levels are different groupings or categories where accountability can be applied. You have the individual level, which is I hold myself accountable for the actions and behaviors that I'm doing, and I know I have to answer perhaps to a manager, or I even answer to myself. Okay, so there is this sense of self-regulated accountability, which is very important. And what you'll find in high-performance employees is that they have a very high sense of self-accountability, where they oftentimes judge their own behaviors, and they know that they'll judge their own behavior, so they tend to operate in a very narrow manner to ensure that they are successful in whatever they're doing. So you have accountability on the individual level. You also have accountability for groups. So I'd say there's a team and they're working on a project. They're going to be held accountable by maybe the organization, maybe the department manager or something, but that team or group has accountability as a group. Then you have at the organizational level or a large level, even society level perhaps, where accountability can be held across large numbers of people. So accountability is fundamental and it can operate at many different levels. Just like I'm talking about accountability from the perspective of the person, the group that's being held accountable, you also have accountability from the other side, the entity, the organization, the person that is holding the group or person accountable. And how do we do that? Well, if you look at it, for example, on an organizational level, organizations have systems, policies, and procedures put in place to hold individuals, groups, and departments accountable for their actions and behaviors. So to take a close look at this slide, as it relates to organizations, accountability can be discussed at multiple levels, individual, group, and organization. Some scholars argue that simply discussing accountability at one level is myopic. It's too small. We need to actually recognize this multi-level faceted approach to accountability. And when we're trying to understand and explore accountability and how it could drive organizational performance, how it could help out with human resources, that we need to look at it from all aspects and how all those multiple levels crisscross with each other. Unfortunately, most of the scholarly research on accountability has been done at one level, the most popular level being the individual level. So how does accountability from a manager to an employee drive performance? How does the role of trust impact employee accountability and thereby performance? How does personality interplay with accountability mechanisms and subsequently, employee performance or so? So research, however, is starting to consider the nature of accountability and the fact that it is cross levels and beginning to explore accountability across multiple levels. Organizations have a number of formal accountability systems, and I kind of mentioned this earlier when we talked about the nature of accountability being multiple level, but everything from norms, beliefs, values of a culture, within an organization help to serve as accountability reinforcers, so to speak. They set expectations for what an individual can expect in terms of accountability, what they can expect in terms of judgment from a manager or the likes thereof. Organizations do not exist in a vacuum. Instead, they're held accountable by internal and external stakeholders. So here's where we're talking about the organizational level of accountability, that organizations themselves are held accountable. It could be by the government, it could be by external stakeholders, it could be by various political organizations and the likes, but accountability is not reserved only for the single individual. Now, this slide here is kind of talking about the fact that academic scholars on accountability are recognizing this multiple level component of accountability, and they're adjusting the research to fit that. And what that's called is meso-level research or meso-level theory, where we're combining multiple levels. So a person who may report to a department, or a department that reports to the organization, or how people function within this complex grouping of accountability. As I mentioned earlier in this lecture, accountability really serves as an underpinning to many other business scholarly research. And here are some examples of such. Responsibility. According to Cunnings and Antone and Slinker, in their articles, they discuss responsibility. And responsibility, in its most basic level, refers to kind of a causality. Somebody did something, and person A did some behavior which resulted in outcome B. Whether it's direct or indirect, that person is responsible for that outcome coming about. Now, a big difference between responsibility and accountability is that a person does not have to answer for responsibility. They're simply responsible. There's a causal type of effect of what's taking place. But there's no actual having to answer for what you've done, nor is there any rewards or punishments that a person may be subject to. So accountability really takes the idea of responsibility and it builds on it. And what you could see from that is how can we begin to use responsibility, grow it into accountability, and begin to mold and shape employee behaviors so they'll be aligned with organizational goals so that we can reach whatever it is we're trying to accomplish as an organization or a department. Judgment and decision making. There's a lot of research out there on judgment and how individuals make decisions within organizations, and accountability plays a big role in that. So as people are looking at making decisions, as they're making judgments on various situations, we find that the process that they undergo is quite a bit different when they're actually held accountable. So a person may make a decision and invest very little cognitive effort in understanding the outcomes of that, or analysis in terms of really trying to understand and predict what would happen with various decisions that they may make. However, when they're held accountable for those, and they know that they're going to have to answer for that decision or that judgment, then we find that they engage cognitively at greater levels. So the idea of judgment and decision making is significantly impacted by accountability. And lastly here, role theory. Role theory deals with the interaction or the interplay between individuals in an organization. Once again, it could be a manager and an employee, it could be a department and an employee, it could be the organization, and a department. It doesn't really matter, but in the role theory model, you have people who are sending information and messages. You have those who are receiving information and messages. They're interpreting that and they're sending it back to the sender, to the person that originally sent the message. Well, as you look at the complex interplay between the parties in role theory, accountability plays a very important role in that as well. Meaning that when a person knows they're going to have to answer for their decisions or behaviors or the lack thereof, they tend to engage more in the activity, take it more seriously. They tend to engage greater effort to understand and to make sure their behaviors are compliant with the expectation of the role sender. So this is just a quick overview of what accountability is and the role it plays in organizations. If you have any questions, be sure to shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to answer them. And thank you, and have a good day.